That's right, it is time for another episode of Final Cut Pro Help Live, and we have a fun one today. Not gonna do any demos, we're just gonna break apart what happened today. And if you don't know, today was the first day of the WWDC event, which is the Worldwide Developers Conference that Apple puts on each year. And this is an event that is geared towards developers, so the people that are making the software that you use on your Macs, your iPhones, iPads, all of those devices. WWDC is where all of the new versions are shown off. They're not released to the public on today, on a WWDC day, but they are shown off and a lot of the new features are shown. And leading up to this, there was a lot of rumblings and rumors going around that maybe Final Cut Pro, which hasn't been updated since December of last year, might get an update. And what you're looking at right now on the screen is what we expect to be the new icon for the next version of Final Cut Pro. And that was actually shown off during the WWDC Keynote. I have it here. I'm going to show you the Keynote. That way we'll break apart their little demo. They actually demoed the next version of Final Cut. It didn't show too much. I'm just going to give you some spoilers. It didn't show too much, but we did get a demo and we got a preview of maybe some features to come and some stuff that's going on. So I'll play it through a couple seconds here. I'm going to pause it and then give my thoughts on it. If you have your own opinions, go ahead and put them down in the chat. Again, this is not designed to be a lesson episode. We're just going to talk about what happened in this new version, and I'll give you my opinions on it. I know some of you have given me comments and feedback saying you want to know what I think is coming in the next version and more of my opinions on that. And I'll give it in this episode. I'll give you what I think here. So let's just go back to the beginning here. I was zoomed super in close on this demo. I'm going to do Shift Z to zoom all the way out. And we have this demo here in Final Cut. So hopefully you can hear it and we'll go through it.
Finally, let's turn to one of our most sophisticated apps, Final Cut Pro.
All right, if you don't know, this is Craig Federighi. He is basically the top guy when it comes to software. He's awesome. He's in most of the keynotes, and I love that he opened up with saying one of the most sophisticated apps. And really, Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, those are some of the top apps that Apple works on. I would say the developer tools with Xcode is probably on top, but as far as users that are actually external users, not developers, Final Cut Pro is definitely one of the top ones. I'm glad he voiced that.
Here it is running on Apple Silicon for the first time. Let's play back some 4K video.
Okay, so there he said that he's going to show off Final Cut running on Apple Silicon for the first time. So what that means is the actual chip that's in your computer, the CPU, that's the silicon. That's what's actually doing all the processing of your data. And this is all behind the scenes stuff, so you as a normal editor working on this, you shouldn't have to be dealing with this, in my opinion. The hardware should just do its thing, and you should be able to edit without everything being like technical. That shouldn't be a thing with editing, and that's what I love about Final Cut. And the big announcement during WWDC, and the reason that they're doing this Final Cut demo, is Apple has announced that they're switching over the Mac line from using Intel processors to now using their own Apple-developed chips. And they've done that for years in the iPhone and the iPad, and now they're taking all of that knowledge that they learned there and bringing it to the Mac. And what you're seeing right now is Final Cut Pro 10 running on a computer that has the same processor that's in an iPad. So you take an iPad Pro, take the processor out of it, and that's what we're seeing here. So that means the power in the chips that are in the iPad has enough power to actually show what you're seeing here in this demo. So maybe we might see a version of Final Cut coming to the iPad in the future. That might be hinted at this kind of stuff. I think that'd be pretty cool. A lot of people have wanted an iOS or iPad version of Final Cut. And I'm right there along with you. I think it would be very cool to be able to edit and work on your computer, edit an entire project, and then go mobile with an iPad somewhere, and you're working with a client, they say, hey, I want to make a little change. Well, you can just whip out your iPad and have your changes, those little changes and tweaks, be able to be done right there on the iPad. Sure, you might not have the full capabilities of Final Cut out mobile with the iPad, but to be able to make changes on the fly, you wouldn't be doing advanced color correction, in my opinion. You wouldn't be doing that necessarily on the iPad only. But someone says, hey, we need to replace a clip, or we want to add a different transition here. Maybe the audio needs tweaked a little bit. Those types of things, I think, on an iPad should be possible there. So that's the Apple Silicon chip that he's talking about. They're bringing that into the Mac, and that's why they're showing this off here.
As you can see, Playback is super smooth, and all your filters are here, and you can apply them in real time. Let's try some color correction. And I can even add animated titles and lens flare.
Okay, animated titles, color corrections. Who knows where these plugins are coming from, or if they are plugins, maybe they're just some very simple motion project that was developed and brought in. Very hard to say. We can definitely see that this is either been rendered or it's in ProRes, so it's running native to the Mac. Very cool that it can run in real time and that it is a 4K project. We can see that in the upper left corner. It's a 4K 24p project. So that's nice. It's one of those things that this whole WWDC was pre-recorded, it seems like. So it's hard to know, as far as the demo goes, how reliable this footage is. With that being said, Apple usually doesn't show things, in my opinion. From what I've seen in my experience, they don't show things that are not possible. So I really believe what he's showing here is what's going to happen on this chip. However, I don't think that's anything too exciting. It's one of the things. It's very cool that it can do it, but I want to see something more practical in my own usage. And this is going to be the same for, I think, everyone else out there. You want to see it in your own environments. You want to see how you're actually going to use it, and if your footage, your codecs actually hold up to this. So later on in WWDC, they announced a developer version of hardware that developers will be able to get to kind of get a preview of this. And it's a Mac Mini running the iPad Pro hardware and that chip that's going to be coming to the Mac later. So my hope is that what they were running here and showing on is that same Mac Mini, because if that's the case, this is probably the minimum hardware that we're going to see in the future with these Apple chips in them. And that's very exciting, because if it can play back we're going to see 3 4K streams. If it can play that back here on some kind of minimal developer hardware, the future hardware versions, because they did announce later in WWDC also that new Mac hardware is coming. If that new Mac hardware is anything, bump up from this, if there's a new chip that's not just the A12, maybe there's something a little bit higher to the next version, the power, I think, is going to be pretty wild on these next ones. I talk a lot about using proxy workflows on minimal hardware. That way you're using even a MacBook Air to edit. You can go and get proxy files and be able to do it. But obviously, if you can avoid proxies, it's one less step in the whole workflow. You can edit your full quality video and content. So if that hardware indeed does have the capability to do that, Apple has so much experience with the iPhones and the iPads and being able to bring all of these chips together to make them extremely efficient. And I'm recently, the past couple of years, I've been working off of desktops, usually iMac computers or Mac Pros, and those machines are great, but they're not portable. So if you could bring all this together and put it in a portable machine and a MacBook Pro, be able to power everything off of that, that'd be very cool. So hopefully we'll get to that point. So what happened next here?
All during live playback. And Final Cut takes advantage of the unique capabilities of the Apple Neural Engine with a new feature that analyzes video and intelligently crops it to keep the most important action in the frame.
Okay, so that feature is a new feature. Final Cut Pro, obviously you can go in right now and crop video. Very easy to do that using the transform tools. You can go in here and adjust the size of it. We could bring up the crop tool, right? And I can go in and crop this video right here without needing to do too much work. That's not a big deal. The thing that's exciting about this is Final Cut's going to be analyzing the footage for us and figuring out what part of the clip is important. So, that's kind of cool. It's going to have some more abilities to auto find objects and things in the app itself. And it's not that you as the editor aren't going to have control of this. It's not that we want Final Cut to edit our entire video for us. That's what the Photos app can do that. Other apps can just automatically detect what's in some shots, and it puts together a little tiny video for it. We don't want that as Final Cut editors. We want the ability to have almost unlimited control to what we're doing. Now, what's exciting about this feature, in my opinion, is as someone that edits a lot of B-roll from very similar shots like this, running on trails, snowboarding, those types of events, to have Final Cut analyze the footage for me and find certain types of shots and be able to focus on things, this would make my life as far as finding shots, B-roll, much, much quicker. Final Cut right now has the ability to analyze clips when you import to find people and to detect shots. If you go up to the Final Cut Pro preferences in here, under the import tab, you'll see all those options. So you'll see this option that says analyze and fix, and it can analyze video for balance, color. It can find people. It can then consolidate those results into collections and groups. So this is where I think this feature is going to come in. There's probably going to be another analyze option that says, analyze and crop into the most desirable footage, or however they're going to word it. Obviously that'll be something that you can turn off. You don't have to let Final Cut do those kind of things. It'd be ridiculous to have that enabled all the time. But to be able to go and analyze footage and have some groups that tell me, okay, this is this is the area of the shot we think we want you to focus in on it. I think that's pretty cool. And if you don't know, I've created a very, very simple split screen effect that you can go and download off of anawesomeguide.com. And it's an effect that allows you to drag and drop onto clips, and it'll create these split screen effects automatically and place clips so that you don't have to use the transform tool or the crop tool or anything like that. Well, in developing that, there's so many people that want these types of compositing options without the need of having years and years of experience to make it easy to do transforms and those types of edits. So that's where this feature is pretty cool, because you can just say, go and analyze it, find the most important thing, and then what you're going to see next is what they're able to do with that effect.
But that's not all. Final Cut fully exploits the system's multi-core architecture to let us play back not just 1 or 2, but 3 streams of full-resolution 4K ProRes, all on an A12Z processor.
All right, so there we see 3 separate streams of the 4K footage playing, including that clip that was allegedly analyzed earlier to show the most important footage. And the reason they're showing these 3 streams of 4K footage playing, which is, if you're familiar with Final Cut, that shouldn't be a groundbreaking thing. The point is, this is playing back on the Apple Silicon chip at 3 streams. So if what's probably going to be the low end of the Apple hardware for Macs is able to play back 3 4K streams, just imagine what the high end stuff can do. So that's pretty exciting for me. With these 3 streams playing back in this split screen, I'm sure they used some of that analyzing to arrange these clips, and it was probably pretty simple for them to do it. So I hope this feature that they're showing, you can actually just connect a couple clips, and when that checkbox is there, the analyze, I think it'd be really cool if there was a compositing option that just says auto composite, and it figures out where to mix and match those clips to arrange them on a little split screen like this, and then maybe there's some tools to adjust it. But as an editor, I want control of it. I don't want Final Cut to do that work for me to have the final say. However, it would be really cool, in my opinion, if they just had this set up without me needing to do anything. If I could just drag these clips onto the timeline and then it figures out how to composite that, and then I could say, I don't like that, or I want to make a change to it. I can then go in and adjust those after the fact. I think that'd be pretty cool. That's one of the more exciting things that they announced with this one. And then let's play the last little bit here.
Amazing. So that's a first look at Universal Apps on Apple Silicon. We're really excited to see so much great.
All right, so that was the end of it there. And like you said, that's all running on the A12Z processor, which is in the iPad Pro right now. So that's the same processor there. So that's what we got. We also saw that little icon there down on the dock. That appears to be the new icon. So with that being said, that's kind of all they announced at WWDC directly talking about Final Cut. They certainly announced new versions of iOS, iPadOS, tvOS, and of course macOS here. One of the things that was included with their announcement and showing off with macOS is they showed a screenshot that showed macOS Big Sur, which is the name of the next version of macOS. And on it, some people saw that it's version 11.0. And why that's significant is all up until now, we've had macOS 10. And it was macOS 10.0, 0.1, all the way up to 10.15, which is our current version. And if you kept on that path, you'd have version 10.16. However, with the major overhaul of the chip and going away from Intel, they're using this as a stepping stone. So we're no longer going to be using macOS 10. We are now going to be on just, I guess, macOS. Big Sur is version 11.0. So pretty exciting that we're seeing some version numbering switching around, which then, of course, got me thinking, okay, well, what about Final Cut? We've been on Final Cut Pro 10 since, we're 9 years and a day. Yesterday was the 9-year anniversary or birth date of Final Cut Pro 10.0 coming out. So does the next version of Final Cut Pro stay with Final Cut Pro 10? Is it going to be 10.5, which a lot of people are thinking was going to be the next big version? Or now that we're seeing this big redesign and that we see that new icon showing up, are we actually going to see Final Cut 11 instead? So I'm very curious to see what everyone thinks about that. Go over to my Twitter at Final Cut Pro Help, and you can see this poll that's up there. I'll keep that up there for a couple days. We'll see what everyone thinks about it and where the votes come in. Let's take a look right now and see where we're at voting-wise. We have a bunch of votes coming in, and right now we're at 67%. So about 2/3 of you think that yes, that next version will be called Final Cut Pro 11 or version 11. They probably won't have that big X on it anymore. And a third of you, 33%, think no, Final Cut Pro 10 will be the next version. Now, I'll put a little asterisk on it. I think this is specifically talking about this one with this new icon. I believe we won't see this version until the fall when this actually comes out to everybody. Unfortunately, I just think that would make sense that they're gonna, when they actually release macOS Big Sur, which is gonna be in the fall, they will probably have Final Cut and other apps come out at that time. That's my guess and my expectation at this time. However, who knows? They could release it later today and then I'm completely wrong. But if they do stick with that and Final Cut 11, which is my guess on the name, I do think it's going to be Final Cut Pro 11. If Final Cut Pro 11 comes out in the fall alongside of macOS Big Sur, I do think we're going to see Final Cut Pro 10, either 10.4.9 or maybe 10.5. I think we will see another version of Final Cut in between now and when that major new release comes out. And the new one that's in the middle there won't be anything major. I think it will just be bug fixes or maybe some other performance things. Maybe a couple little features here and there, but that's a possibility because, again, like I mentioned earlier in the stream, the last major update to Final Cut, and not even really major, 10.4.8 is the current version, and that came out in December. which is about 6 months ago. That's a long time to go without a Final Cut update. There were, I think, 3 or 4 at least updates of Final Cut 10 in 2019 last year. So it's wild that we've gone this long without an update. However, I find Final Cut's pretty stable with some little exceptions here and there on new hardware, certain codecs that I've been hearing. But yeah, what do you think? Go ahead and leave a comment on this stream or go over to Twitter and give a vote in there. Do you think this version that we saw previewed in WWDC today, is that going to be called Final Cut Pro 10 with some 10.5 or another number after it? Or when that comes out, is it going to be Final Cut Pro 11? I want to hear what you think. I also want to hear what you think about what we saw in the stream today. Obviously, very, very short. It was only about a minute long of demos, so there's not anything major. And if you're used to Final Cut, we didn't see anything super exciting necessarily on this. They hid most of the timeline and what was happening. But what do you think? Is it going to be something worth upgrading to, or is there something else you're hoping they show up? Let me know down in the comments. With that said, a couple other just little tidbits that are things that I noticed is, for the most part, the Final Cut interface was unchanged. I didn't see many other new things to look at. You can see and compare it. Out here we have the actual Final Cut Pro current version running, and then in here on the viewer we have the version they were using for this demo. The icons that we see, the buttons, are almost the same, if not the same, maybe a little bit difference on the shading that's here. It does look a little bit darker. I don't know if that was just the video and the compression that they use maybe for the WWDC, but if it is darker, I mean, that for me, that's kind of nice, because a lot of the new displays take advantage of any time there's just no color, which is just a black screen. It uses less power, so I wouldn't mind if some of the interface was a little bit darker, just to use less power and energy on the portable machines. But otherwise, I didn't notice any other major things that would be different or exciting or worth necessarily diving into. You can see, now that I'm looking at, one little thing that's interesting is right in the middle here. There's a little drop down triangle here next to the name of the project. I'm curious if they were buried in a pre-rendered compound clip or something else like that. But yeah, that was it there. You can see they made a favorites category for their effects there, and that's probably just a pre-built thing. But it'd be cool if you could go in here and mark a transition or something, an effect. If you could say make it a favorite, and then there'd be a favorite category. I don't know if that's an actual feature or if they just made this custom one for the demo. Who knows, right? But that's about it that I noticed for the little interface and the changes that are there. So that's what I had for you today. Again, if you haven't seen this, go ahead and go over to apple.com. They have the WWDC Keynote on their website there. You can always go and watch past versions too. But go on there, you can watch the announcements that came out today. This Final Cut demo happened much later in the keynote itself. This down here, let me zoom into it. This down here is the entire length of the keynote. And so this last segment starts over here. The last segment of the keynote, about halfway through it, that's where the Final Cut demo happened, with only about 11 minutes left in the stream. So it was right near the end. But this whole last segment, even the last 2 segments, looking at macOS and the new chip that Apple's developing, those are very interesting. And as a Final Cut user and editor, if you're the one using it, I strongly recommend going on there and taking a look at this just to see what's ahead. If you are considering upgrading to this, like I've said in many other videos, you always have a backup, be ready to go with that kind of stuff. If you're wanting to jump on this new hardware and all this when it comes out, be very careful. Don't sell all your stuff and then go to the Apple Store and get a new computer. This is a transition, just like they did from PowerPC to Intel back in kind of 2006, 7, 8, those years of transitioning hardware. There were a lot of issues, so don't jump on it. Final Cut's pretty complex. I'm sure it's going to be pretty smooth compared to that last transition, but don't plan everything to jump over that. If you're in the middle of a project, just don't. you're asking for trouble. With that being said, I am going to do it. I am ready to jump on it to experiment with it because I want to know what problems are going to be showing up. So make sure you hit subscribe and notifications there. If that stuff shows up and I find issues, I'll be doing demos on all that new stuff when it does come out. What was the other thing? There was one other thing I wanted to talk about, which is the developer copies or versions of software. And they said next month we're going to see public previews of this, kind of public betas that you can jump on. And I do want to put a note out there. Don't do those betas on your only systems. All right, especially with you that are using these systems to edit video with Final Cut Pro. You're really asking for trouble by installing a beta. Betas are great. I recommend testing them out. Get a separate hard drive that you can install the betas on. Have a developer environment, and if you don't know what that means, do some searches on the web. You can figure out how to set up these other OSs. But that's the way to test out beta software and even regular versions of Final Cut. If a new version comes out, you don't necessarily want to update your system right away. If you can have a separate OS install, a separate drive, that's such a much better way to go about doing that. And I know a lot of you that follow this channel and watch this channel are newer to some of this advanced software and what we're using here, and installing a separate OS and running two OSs at once on the same system, like those are pretty complex things. So I don't expect you to necessarily know exactly step by step how to do that. But if you don't know how to do that, installing beta software, Final Cut or Mac OS beta, if you're just jumping to that and you don't know how to install separate developer environments or a separate OS, you're really asking for trouble. So make sure to learn that side of it first. Worst case though, if you don't do any of that, if you're just going to go in blind, at least create a backup of your data. Use Time Machine or another method to back up all of your system. That way you don't lose any of that data. If something really bad happens, it's not the end of the world. We can get that data back. That's the worst thing, is when someone reaches out to me and they're talking about an issue that they're having and something gets corrupted and we find out that, something really bad did happen and we just need to either reset or you lost data. And my next question is, did you have a backup of what's there? And when it's a no, that's where you're kind of out of luck. So getting an external hard drive, using Time Machine to back up to that external hard drive, it's very inexpensive when you look at the cost of having to re-edit something or start over. I mean, time tends to be much more valuable than anything. So if you can spend the 60, 70, 80 bucks on an external hard drive, doesn't have to be anything special. External hard drive, plug it in, use Time Machine to back up. You'll save yourself a lot of headache in the long run. So thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope you found this useful. If you want me to do more videos like this where it's just my opinions as opposed to very specific demos going on, let me know down in the comments. If you are on the other side of it, didn't like this, didn't find it valuable, let me know in the comments as well. Always want to see what works and what doesn't work. And then the most important question out of all of them, are you excited for this next version of Final Cut Pro 10? If you think it's going to be Final Cut Pro 10, go ahead and go onto Twitter at Final Cut Pro Help. Get a vote in that it's going to be called Final Cut Pro 10. Or if you're like me, it's going to be called Final Cut Pro 11. I think they're going to drop the X, the 10 from the name, and it's going to be Final Cut Pro 11, just like the next version of Mac OS is Mac OS 11. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day.